All right, let's take a deep dive into one of the most enigmatic, feared, and potentially terrifying races in the Warhammer 40K universe, the Hrud. Imagine for a moment if they were the most ancient and most powerful race in the galaxy, overshadowing the Eldar, the Necrons, and even the mighty Imperium of man. What would the galaxy look like if the Hrud had emerged victorious and remained the dominant force throughout history? How would it change the fate of the universe? Now, before we jump into the chaos of alternate realities, it's important to understand who the Hrud really are. They're often overlooked, shrouded in mystery, and dismissed by most of the galaxy's power players. But what if that perception is wrong? What if the Hrud are not just some obscure, elusive species, but the true architects of the galaxy's most significant events? A force of unimaginable power lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to take center stage. The Hrud, with their ability to manipulate time and decay, their alien nature, and their predatory instincts, might just be the galaxy's oldest and most influential race, in ways we've yet to fully comprehend. In this video, we'll explore a fascinating hypothetical. What if the Hrud were not only the most ancient, but also the most powerful race in the galaxy? How would that change the fabric of Warhammer 40K as we know it? Let's take a look at how the Hrud could have shaped the galaxy, and why they might have been the true rulers all along. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The origins of the Hrud are shrouded in mystery, hidden deep within the earliest chapters of galactic history. We know little about where they truly came from, but the whispers that linger in the dark corners of the 40K universe paint a fascinating picture of a race so ancient that their true story is lost to the sands of time. Unlike the noble Eldar or the cold, calculating Necrons, the Hrud didn't leave behind glorious artifacts or grandiose histories to be studied. Instead, they left behind only faint traces of their existence, evidence of a long-forgotten power that once ruled the galaxy with an unseen hand. The Hrud were once a civilization of untold greatness, one that flourished in the early days of the galaxy, long before the rise of the Imperium. While the Eldar were basking in the heights of their golden age, the Hrud were quietly building their empire in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of the other races. They were an enigmatic race, focused on the quiet accumulation of power rather than on the grandeur of conquest. They were not driven by glory or the need for domination, but rather by a far more insidious goal, the mastery over the very fabric of decay and time itself. Fan theories often suggest that the Hrud were once a part of the greater web of the Old Ones, an ancient race that shaped the galaxy with their advanced knowledge and strange, otherworldly technology. The Hrud, it is believed, were the Old Ones' servants, an underground species tasked with the caretaking of the galaxy's secret places and the keepers of forbidden knowledge. The rise of the Hrud, according to some theories, came when the Old Ones grew distant, entrusting their legacy to these dark servants. In those early days, the Hrud didn't need to fight for their place among the stars. They were content to thrive in the shadows, hidden from the great wars that raged between the Old Ones and the Necrons. But as the galaxy's tides shifted and the war between these ancient races tore the heavens apart, the Hrud were forced to retreat further into the darkness. Their civilization was decimated by the conflicts around them, their power waning in the face of the cataclysmic rise of the Necrons and the fall of the Old Ones. But the Hrud didn't fade into obscurity. No, they adapted. They evolved. They learned to thrive in environments that were inhospitable to most. While the galaxy burned around them, the Hrud retreated to places where time itself seemed to bend, into the crevices of the universe, places forgotten by even the most ancient of races. It's from these dark corners of reality that they grew, their power silently swelling in the background. Some fans speculate that the Hrud were never meant to be forgotten. They were always a lurking force, waiting for the right moment to reassert themselves. It's easy to imagine them as the silent architects of the galaxy's hidden history, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. While the galaxy's great powers, such as the Imperium and the Eldar, focused on their own wars and ambitions, the Hrud bided their time. Their greatest strength was always their ability to manipulate the very essence of decay and time, powers so subtle and yet so potent that no one even noticed them at first. There's an idea that the Hrud might have been a part of the ancient race of the Ingir, a forgotten civilization known only in the cryptic prophecies of the Eldar. Some theories suggest that the Hrud were once a powerful part of the Ingir until they were cast down and forced to evolve into something even darker and more insidious. The Ingir themselves were said to have been masters of entropy and decay, a race that wielded these forces to unimaginable power. If this theory holds any weight, the Hrud could very well be the surviving remnants of this ancient, catastrophic civilization, changed and twisted over millennia, yet still possessing fragments of that once great power. Others propose that the Hrud have always existed on the fringes of known space, their history so ancient that it predates the rise of even the Old Ones. According to this theory, the Hrud were the galaxy's first race to discover the secret to harnessing entropy, learning to control the slow, inexorable march of time and decay. This knowledge, handed down from one generation to the next, made them one of the most dangerous races in the galaxy, even if they never fully unleashed their power on the wider universe. Some believe that the Hrud's relationship with the galaxy's other ancient races, the Eldar, Necrons, and even the Tyranids, is one of hidden rivalry. While the Eldar were the shining stars of the galaxy's past, the Hrud remained in the background, quietly amassing power and influence. The Necrons, on the other hand, were the cosmic destroyers, and it's easy to imagine that the Hrud, with their control over entropy, would have seen the Necrons as a direct threat to their mastery over time. If the Hrud were indeed once a greater power, they may have seen the Necrons rise as an existential crisis, one that forced them to retreat and conceal themselves in the shadows, far from the reach of their cold enemies. It's intriguing to think about what might have been had the Hrud never faded into obscurity. If they had been allowed to flourish, would they have become the ultimate rulers of the galaxy, their power unmatched by any of the other races? Would the galaxy have bowed to their mastery over time and decay, their influence subtly shaping every corner of existence? Some fan theories suggest that, had the Hrud survived, they would have created a vast dark empire, one built not on military might but on the slow, inexorable forces of entropy, a creeping influence that would have slowly consumed the galaxy from within. It's possible that the Hrud, had they not been so insular and mysterious, might have had an even greater influence on the galaxy than we could ever imagine. Instead of grand wars and bloody conflicts, their empire would have been one of slow, quiet manipulation, an empire where their power was felt in every aspect of galactic life, at the edges of time, in the decay of civilizations, and in the subtle unraveling of reality itself. In the end, the ancient origins of the Hrud may remain as mysterious as the galaxy itself, but the more we dig into their past, the more we realize that they were never a race to be underestimated. They are the ghosts of a forgotten time, their influence hidden from view, but ever present, waiting for the moment when they will rise again. When we talk about the most powerful races in the galaxy, we often think of the towering might of the Imperium of man, the cold, relentless precision of the Necrons, or the intricate technology of the Eldar. These races are known for their advanced technology, their sophisticated weaponry, and their ability to shape the galaxy according to their will. But what if the Hrud, a race often relegated to the shadows, possessed technology that was far more potent than any of these? What if their true power lay not in the weapons they wielded, but in their command over time itself, the very essence of decay and entropy? The technology of the Hrud is unlike anything seen in the galaxy today. While the Eldar and the Necrons have long been lauded for their advanced creations, the Hrud have developed a completely different kind of technological mastery. Their most notable ability is their control over entropy, the decay of matter, the breakdown of structures, the slow and inevitable rot that affects all things. This isn't just some passive ability they've acquired over millennia. No, the Hrud's control over decay is a fundamental part of their technology, woven into every aspect of their civilization. Imagine for a moment that the Hrud were not just masters of decay, but that they could harness it in ways that no other race could even fathom. Their technology would not be like the flashy, energy-based weapons of the Imperium or the sleek, high-tech gear of the Eldar. Instead, it would be subtle, insidious, and profoundly dangerous. The Hrud would not need to fire massive beams of energy to bring down their enemies. Instead, they could collapse structures with a whisper, degrade machinery to the point of uselessness with a single thought, and cause the very air around them to decay, turning once strong warriors into nothing more than crumbling dust. What's even more frightening is that this control over entropy wouldn't be limited to just physical decay. Some fans have theorized that the Hrud's technology could extend into manipulating the passage of time itself. If they truly understood the fundamental laws of the universe, what's to stop them from rewriting time to their advantage? They could age their enemies in the blink of an eye, turning mighty armies into decrepit remnants. Or perhaps even more terrifyingly, they could manipulate time to undo the actions of their enemies, erasing victories and battles as though they never happened. The implications are terrifying, and it's easy to see how such power could easily make the Hrud the most dangerous race in the galaxy. When comparing the Hrud to the more well-known races, it's clear that their technology doesn't follow the same path. The Eldar, for all their psychic abilities and advanced machines, are still very much tied to the physical. Their weapons and technology rely on precision and energy, manipulating the universe through mastery of the material. The Necrons, with their cold metallic bodies and trans-dimensional weaponry, bend the laws of physics through sheer force and advanced science. But the Hrud, they don't bend the rules of the universe. They understand them at their deepest level, using the forces of decay and time as a tool to shape reality itself. One of the most fascinating theories that fans have proposed is that the Hrud's technological prowess doesn't come from superior machinery, but from their deep understanding of the underlying mechanics of the universe. While other races build powerful war machines, the Hrud simply understand how to break them down, unraveling their very essence. A Hrud strike force wouldn't rely on overwhelming firepower to defeat their foes. Instead, they would undermine their enemies by causing their weaponry to fail at a molecular level, erasing entire armies without firing a shot. This mastery over entropy doesn't just affect their weapons either. It extends to their entire society. The Hrud are a race that has learned to thrive in the darkness, adapting their technology to the decaying environments they inhabit. Unlike the elegant, pristine designs of the Eldar or the cold, impervious forms of the Necrons, the Hrud's creations are fluid and organic, constantly changing and evolving as they adapt to their environment. In a way, the Hrud's technology is not a static force, but one that constantly evolves, growing stronger and more refined over time, just like the decay they so carefully control. But what would it mean if the Hrud were the most powerful race in the galaxy? Well, for one, their influence would be everywhere. Imagine a galaxy where time itself is no longer a constant, where the laws of entropy could be controlled, and entire civilizations could crumble into dust at the slightest touch. The Hrud's power would not be overt. It would not be seen in grand displays of force, like the Emperor's Golden Throne or the Necron Tomb Worlds. No, their power would be felt in the slow, creeping decay that infects every aspect of galactic life. A once great empire could fall apart without a single shot being fired, and the mightiest of armies could be reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, their strength and will eroded over time. Some fans even speculate that the Hrud's technology could allow them to manipulate entire star systems, causing entire suns to burn out or destabilizing entire regions of space. Imagine a race with the power to collapse entire star systems into nothingness, to wipe out entire colonies with the flick of a finger. The galaxy would no longer be a place of stability and order. It would be a place of constant decay, where nothing, no matter how great, could withstand the slow march of time and entropy. But beyond their sheer destructive potential, there's something else that makes the Hrud's technology so terrifying: their secrecy. While other races may boast of their powerful weapons and armies, the Hrud's true strength lies in their ability to remain hidden, to stay in the shadows while their enemies unknowingly march toward their own destruction. No one knows the full extent of the Hrud's power, and that is perhaps their greatest advantage. They are the ghosts in the machine, the unseen hand that guides the fate of the galaxy, always watching, always waiting. The Hrud's technology isn't just powerful, it's terrifying in its simplicity. They don't need the grand, destructive weapons of other races. They don't need to conquer the galaxy with force. Instead, they have mastered the most fundamental law of the universe: decay. And if they were the most powerful race in the galaxy, that law would become the very foundation of their rule. The galaxy would be their domain, one in which time and decay reign supreme. And as the universe slowly crumbled into nothingness, the Hrud would stand as the silent, eternal rulers of a galaxy undone. The potential influence of the Hrud on the galaxy is something that sends a chill down the spine of anyone who truly considers it. When we look at the power structures that dominate the galaxy, the Imperium, the Eldar, the Necrons, and the Orcs, it's easy to imagine a galaxy teetering on the brink of chaos, with powerful factions constantly vying for supremacy. But what if one of the most ancient, most dangerous forces in the galaxy was hidden from sight, quietly influencing everything in the shadows, its power growing while everyone else was too distracted with their own wars and ambitions? What if that force was the Hrud? The key to understanding the potential reach of the Hrud lies in their nature: secretive, patient, and insidious. While other races like the Eldar and the Imperium may have built vast empires that stretch across the stars, the Hrud are the unseen hand that guides the course of history from the dark corners of the galaxy. Their influence isn't something that is broadcast in dazzling displays of power. No, their influence is slow, creeping, and devastating in its subtlety. If the Hrud were the most influential race in the galaxy, their power wouldn't come from outright wars or galactic domination. It would come from the quiet erosion of every empire, every civilization, and every life they touched. Imagine a galaxy where the Hrud were pulling the strings behind the scenes. A galaxy where nothing, no matter how grand or powerful, could withstand the slow, inevitable march of time and decay. Every military victory, every technological leap, every political maneuver could be undone by the Hrud's ability to slowly degrade it all. Planets could fall into ruin without a single shot being fired. Entire star systems could collapse under the weight of unseen forces, and entire civilizations could be erased from history, reduced to dust in the blink of an eye. This is the type of power the Hrud would wield if they were the galaxy's most influential race, not by force, but by the slow, subtle breakdown of everything they touched. Fan theories about the Hrud's influence often speculate that they've already been influencing the galaxy for millennia without anyone even realizing it. The Hrud are experts in remaining hidden, in staying in the background while everything around them falls apart. They might have been the unseen cause of the fall of ancient civilizations, the silent architects behind the slow crumbling of once great empires. Perhaps the Imperium's decline wasn't just the result of its own internal corruption, but the quiet influence of the Hrud, slowly working from the shadows to weaken the foundation of humanity's greatest empire. In a galaxy where so many factions are caught up in their own battles for power, it's easy to see how the Hrud could quietly grow in strength, influencing the flow of history in ways no one even notices. Consider the Eldar, for instance. The ancient and powerful race, once the rulers of the galaxy, is now teetering on the brink of extinction, their once great empire shattered. It's easy to attribute their fall to their own hubris, their addiction to pleasure, or their catastrophic war with the forces of chaos. But what if the Eldar's decline was not entirely of their own making? What if the Hrud had been subtly eroding their civilization for centuries, making them weaker, more vulnerable to the cataclysmic events that would ultimately lead to their downfall? The Hrud's mastery over entropy and decay could have been the unseen hand that tipped the scales against the Eldar, slowly turning their once glorious empire into a crumbling relic of a bygone age. Then there's the Necrons. The cold, calculating race of eternal machines, once the rulers of the galaxy, are now waking from their slumber to reclaim their former glory. The Necrons are a threat unlike any other, with their advanced technology and their terrifying ability to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. But what if the rise of the Necrons was part of a larger cosmic struggle, a battle between forces even older than the Necrons themselves? The Hrud, with their mastery over decay and time, could very well have been in direct conflict with the Necrons for control of the galaxy, with each side vying for dominance in the most subtle ways imaginable. Perhaps the Necrons' rise from their slumber is not just the return of a once great power, but the Hrud's influence waning as the Necrons slowly reassert themselves. The Hrud's influence on the galaxy would also be felt in the most unlikely of places, on the fringes of space where most of the galaxy's great powers don't even bother to look. The Hrud thrive in the shadows, in places that others wouldn't even think to explore. They could have already infiltrated the far reaches of the galaxy, using their subtle, insidious influence to shape the course of history in places where no one even thinks to look. Entire star systems, forgotten and ignored by the major powers, could be the perfect breeding grounds for the Hrud's influence, where they could quietly build their strength, biding their time until the galaxy's great powers are too weak to stop them. Some fans even speculate that the Hrud could be behind the creation of the Tyranids, the galaxy's most ravenous and unstoppable force. If the Hrud were the most powerful and influential race in the galaxy, they could have played a part in creating the Tyranids as a way to further their own goals. The Tyranids, with their insatiable hunger and relentless drive to consume everything in their path, could be the perfect tool for the Hrud to use in their quiet war of attrition. The Hrud could have unleashed the Tyranids upon the galaxy, knowing that their relentless consumption would weaken their enemies, leaving them vulnerable to the slow, creeping power of entropy. The potential for the Hrud's influence is mind-boggling. If they were truly the most powerful and influential race in the galaxy, the entire galaxy would feel their presence in every corner, every darkened corner of space. They wouldn't need to conquer the galaxy with armies or battles. No, the Hrud would be the unseen architects of the galaxy's slow decline, the ones who slowly erode the foundations of every empire, every race, and every civilization. Their power would be the kind that no one could truly see coming, the kind of power that works from the shadows, undermining everything until there is nothing left. In the end, the galaxy's greatest powers might never realize what hit them. They may never know that the slow, subtle decay of their civilizations was the result of a force far older and more powerful than they could ever comprehend. The Hrud, with their patient, insidious nature, would be the true rulers of the galaxy, and by the time the galaxy realized they were under attack, it would be too late. The Imperium of Man, the vast, sprawling empire that stretches across the galaxy, is a testament to humanity's incredible will to survive and dominate. It stands as a monument to the resilience of mankind, forged in the fires of countless wars, driven by an unyielding desire for order and control. But imagine for a moment if that empire, which now fights tooth and nail to hold on to its fragmented existence, was never the uncontested ruler of the galaxy. What if, instead of the Imperium standing as the dominant force, the Hrud were the true power behind the galaxy's wheel? How would the Imperium have been affected if the Hrud had risen to prominence instead? First, let's consider the nature of the Imperium itself. The Imperium is a fortress, not just in the physical sense, but ideologically as well. It is built on a foundation of unwavering faith in the Emperor, whose vision of humanity's place in the stars is one of absolute control, order, and dominance. However, what if the Hrud, with their subtlety and mastery over entropy, had been the true power that ruled behind the scenes, quietly dismantling the foundations of the Imperium? The Imperium's military might, its technological advancements, and even its fanatical devotion to the Emperor might have been for naught in the face of such a secretive and insidious force. The Hrud's influence over time would have been felt slowly, like a creeping poison. Rather than an outright attack, the Hrud would have worked from the shadows, eroding the Imperium's strength bit by bit, turning its greatest victories into hollow shells, empty of meaning and power. The Hrud's ability to manipulate decay and entropy would have meant that no matter how mighty the Imperium's soldiers were, no matter how powerful its fleets or weapons, they would be doomed to deteriorate. Entire legions of the Imperial Guard could have found their weapons falling apart at the most crucial moment. Starships could have become brittle and useless, their once pristine hulls decaying beyond repair. One of the most profound impacts the Hrud could have had on the Imperium would have been in their ability to manipulate time. The Imperium's history is fraught with conflict, battles, and wars, and the constant push and pull between the Emperor's will and the forces that threaten humanity's survival. But imagine if the Hrud had the ability to erase or reverse history itself. The Imperium's victories could have been wiped away as if they never happened, its greatest moments of triumph turning into fading memories that disappeared with the passing of time. The endless campaigns fought by the Imperium would have been destined to fail before they even began, and the galaxy's greatest power would find itself on the brink of oblivion, lost to the endless tide of entropy that the Hrud could control. Some fans believe that the Hrud might have played a far more subtle role in the Imperium's history, acting not as an outright enemy, but as a silent force that guided the galaxy's events toward their own ends. What if the Hrud had been behind the fall of ancient human civilizations, their decay quietly contributing to the fragmentation of humanity before the rise of the Imperium? What if they were the true architects of the Age of Strife, guiding humanity's collapse, ensuring that the Imperium would rise only to face their inevitable destruction? The Hrud, with their mastery over entropy, could have influenced the very foundations of the Imperium's creation, making it a fragile thing from the start, always destined to crumble under the weight of time and decay. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the Hrud's influence would have been their ability to infect the Imperium's very core. The Hrud thrive in the shadows, in places that others cannot see, and their influence could have spread silently through the ranks of the Imperium's leadership. They might have corrupted entire sectors, cities, or even high-ranking officials, turning them into agents of decay without ever revealing their true nature. The Imperium's vast bureaucracy, with its sprawling institutions and complex systems, could have been quietly infected by the Hrud's influence, causing it to rot from within. The seemingly unshakable structure of the Imperium, which holds together a galaxy-spanning empire, would become brittle and fragile, unable to withstand the slow, creeping decay that the Hrud could manipulate. The The most chilling theory among fans is that the Hrud might have been behind the creation of the Chaos Gods. The warp itself, as we know it, is a realm of raw emotion, power, and destruction. The Chaos Gods, born from the excesses of mortal souls, have thrived in the chaos of the galaxy. But what if, in this alternate timeline, the Hrud had manipulated the birth of the Chaos Gods, guiding the warp's dark powers to suit their own needs? The Hrud's manipulation of entropy could have fed into the very forces of chaos, allowing them to grow and spread across the galaxy. This would mean that, instead of the Hrud being just one more race struggling for survival, they could have been the true masters behind the rise of the Chaos Gods, orchestrating the fall of the Imperium in a way that no one could have anticipated. Moreover, the Hrud's influence over time would have impacted the Imperium's greatest strengths, its devotion to the Emperor and the unyielding faith of its people. Imagine a galaxy where the Emperor's golden throne is not the pinnacle of humanity's aspirations, but a crumbling relic, worn down by centuries of decay. The Imperium's faith in the Emperor would be a hollow echo, as every victory, every triumph, would slowly decay into dust. The Imperium's drive to maintain order and control over the galaxy would become increasingly difficult as the Hrud's influence stretched further and further, seeping into the very core of Imperial society. The once unified Imperium, held together by the Emperor's vision, would find itself splintering under the weight of time's unstoppable march. Would the Hrud have conquered the galaxy in a way that we imagine the Imperium does today? Probably not. The Hrud are not conquerors in the traditional sense. Their power doesn't lie in the ability to crush their enemies with sheer force. Instead, their power is the slow, grinding erosion of everything they touch, turning even the greatest civilizations into nothing more than dust. The Imperium, with its relentless wars and its devotion to conquest, would have been ill-prepared for such an insidious threat. The Hrud would not need to battle the Imperium with armies or fleets. They would only need to wait, to let time and decay work their magic until even the Imperium's greatest triumphs were reduced to nothingness. In the end, if the Hrud had become the dominant force in the galaxy, the Imperium of man might have never been able to rise at all. The Hrud's slow and insidious influence would have made the very foundation of the Imperium unstable. What might have been humanity's greatest empire could have been a fractured, fading shadow, slowly crumbling under the weight of a force far more ancient and far more powerful than anything mankind could have imagined. The Imperium might have been doomed from the start, its fate sealed not by the violence of war, but by the quiet, creeping touch of decay. The galaxy is home to many ancient and powerful races, but few are as steeped in mystery and influence as the Eldar and the Necrons. These two races have shaped the course of galactic history in ways that most others can only dream of, each in their own unique way. But what would happen if the Hrud, with their mastery of entropy and time, interacted with these ancient powers? What would their relationships look like, given that the Hrud are neither conquerors in the traditional sense nor passive bystanders? These are the kinds of questions that stir the imagination of fans who have long speculated on what might have been if the Hrud had been active players on the galactic stage, directly interacting with the Eldar and Necrons. Would they have been allies, rivals, or something far more complex? The Eldar, with their psychic abilities and unparalleled sophistication, have always seen themselves as the rulers of the galaxy's past. They were the first to dominate the stars, and their technology and culture reflect a kind of ethereal grace that few other races could hope to match. But the rise of the Hrud would have been a direct challenge to the Eldar's claim to galactic supremacy. The Hrud's ability to manipulate entropy and decay would be anathema to the Eldar's pursuit of perfection and immortality. The Eldar, who pride themselves on their advanced technology and psychic prowess, would have found themselves at odds with the Hrud's much more subtle and insidious abilities. The two races would likely have seen each other as rivals, with the Hrud's slow, creeping influence threatening the very foundations of Eldar society. Fan theories often suggest that the Eldar, with their near-immortal lifespan, would view the Hrud as a dangerous force precisely because of their mastery over time. The Eldar's obsession with preventing their extinction would make them acutely aware of the Hrud's power. If the Hrud could manipulate time and decay, they could undo everything the Eldar have fought for: their long lifespan, their advanced technology, and even their psychic abilities. The Eldar might not see the Hrud as an immediate physical threat, but more as a force that could erode everything they value. Perhaps this is why, in the dark corners of the 40K lore, there are whispers of hidden Eldar factions that have made covert moves against the Hrud. These Eldar might not have launched full-scale wars against the Hrud, but their interventions would likely have been more subtle, spreading misinformation, sabotaging Hrud efforts, and even taking down entire Hrud-controlled systems without anyone knowing who was behind the attack. Another theory put forth by fans is that the Hrud might see the Eldar as a rival that must be dealt with quietly, just as they've always operated in the shadows. The Hrud's methods are far less direct than the Eldar's. While the Eldar might strike with precision and psychic power, the Hrud would prefer to erode the Eldar's strength from within, making the Eldar's perfection crumble bit by bit. If the Hrud had truly become the dominant power in the galaxy, they might have utilized their mastery over decay to subtly weaken the Eldar's grip on reality, causing their cities and fortresses to slowly deteriorate, their once glorious technology to rust and decay, all without the Eldar ever realizing the true threat until it was far too late. But the relationship between the Hrud and the Necrons would be even more complicated. The Necrons, with their unfeeling metallic forms and their mastery over the very essence of reality, are the ultimate expression of immortality. They were once the rulers of the galaxy before they were cursed into their robotic forms, and now they seek to reclaim their dominion. In many ways, the Necrons are the opposite of the Hrud. Whereas the Necrons seek to impose their cold, rigid control on the galaxy, the Hrud work in the shadows, manipulating the very forces of decay to erode the foundations of existence. Where the Necrons are unyielding and mechanical, the Hrud are fluid, adaptable, and insidious. So, what would their relationship look like? If the Hrud were to come into direct conflict with the Necrons, it would likely be a clash of ideologies as much as it would be a war of attrition. The Necrons, with their advanced technology and their ability to manipulate time and space, might initially seem like a formidable foe for the Hrud, but the Hrud's mastery of entropy and decay would provide them with an advantage that the Necrons might struggle to combat. The Necrons' mechanical nature makes them vulnerable to the forces of decay, and it's easy to imagine the Hrud exploiting this weakness. The Hrud could use their powers to break down the Necrons' technological marvels, slowly eroding their once imposing armies until they were little more than rusted husks, powerless against the relentless march of time. One fan theory proposes that the Hrud could even be responsible for the Necrons' fall into their current state. It's well known that the Necrons were once the biological Necrontire, a race that sought immortality through terrible means, ultimately succumbing to the Citan's influence. But what if the Hrud, with their long history and their ability to manipulate entropy, were the ones who brought about the Necrons' curse? If the Hrud were aware of the Necrons' quest for immortality, they might have seen it as a direct challenge to their own power, and they could have used their understanding of time and decay to sabotage the Necrontyrs' efforts, forcing them into the robotic forms they inhabit today. The Necrons, of course, might never acknowledge this, but it would make sense for the Hrud to use such subtlety to erase a rival from existence, without ever firing a shot or sending an army to do battle. Despite their differences, it's also possible that the Hrud and the Necrons could have worked together, albeit for very different reasons. Both races are ancient and possess technology that manipulates the laws of the universe in unnatural ways. The Necrons seek to reassert their control over the galaxy, while the Hrud would seek to continue their quiet erosion of all things, making the galaxy ripe for their own rule. In this scenario, the Hrud and Necrons could have formed a secret alliance, each race contributing to the other's cause in ways that no one could have foreseen. The Hrud's subtle manipulation of decay would have been the perfect complement to the Necrons' brutal, unrelenting drive for power. Together, they could have reshaped the galaxy in their image, with the Hrud working from the shadows to ensure that nothing, not even the Necrons, would stand in their way. Ultimately, the Hrud's relationship with both the Eldar and the Necrons would have been shaped by their unique abilities. The Hrud's mastery over decay and time would make them a dangerous and unpredictable force in the galaxy, one that neither the Eldar nor the Necrons could fully understand or predict. Their influence, subtle and insidious, would ensure that the galaxy would never be the same, regardless of whether they were working in opposition to these ancient races or alongside them in a dangerous and unpredictable alliance. The cultural impact of the Hrud, if they were to rise to power and shape the galaxy, would be nothing short of revolutionary, albeit in a dark and unsettling way. Their society is built upon a foundation of decay and entropy, forces that most other civilizations fear or fight against. But for the Hrud, these forces are not just part of the natural order, they are the core of their identity. Imagine a galaxy where the entire cultural framework of the ruling race revolves around these principles of inevitable degradation and transformation. It's a society that, instead of trying to avoid decay, embraces it and uses it as a means of control, power, and structure. The Hrud's culture would likely be a reflection of their unique relationship with time, entropy, and decay. They would view the passage of time not as a slow erosion of their world, but as a necessary process of natural selection, a way of refining and perfecting their society. This would be a culture built on a harsh, unforgiving understanding of life, where everything is subject to the rule of decay. Even the very concept of life itself might be seen as a fleeting moment, something to be cherished only in the brief instant before it fades away. It would be a society where the pursuit of permanence is not only pointless but perhaps even dangerous. One of the most striking elements of Hrud culture would be their ruthless pragmatism. In a galaxy where idealism and noble causes often define the motivations of great powers, the Hrud would stand in stark contrast. They would be a people whose every action is calculated for maximum efficiency, with no room for sentimentality or waste. This mindset would make them remarkably efficient in their dealings with others. Alliances, treaties, and political marriages would be nothing more than tools to further their cause, to ensure that their influence spreads and that the inevitable decay of their enemies continues unabated. The Hrud's social structure would likely mirror this ruthlessness. Instead of the rigid hierarchies seen in other races, where bloodlines or power bases define one's place in society, the Hrud would likely embrace a more fluid system, one where power is constantly shifting, where alliances are forged and broken in the blink of an eye, and where survival is the ultimate goal. Power within Hrud society would be earned through cunning and the ability to manipulate decay, whether that decay takes the form of physical destruction, the erosion of political power, or the slow decay of a rival's resources. The concept of loyalty would be a foreign one to the Hrud, replaced instead by a system of expedient cooperation, where the only loyalty is to the survival and furtherance of the Hrud themselves. In terms of their military culture, the Hrud would have a very different approach to warfare compared to other galactic powers. Rather than launching full-scale invasions or battles, The Hrud would use their mastery over entropy to subtly weaken their enemies over time. Imagine a war where entire fleets fall apart in the middle of battle, their hulls deteriorating at a molecular level, their weapons turning to dust as they try to fire. The Hrud would not need massive armies or colossal warships. They would wage war by degrading the will and ability of their enemies to resist. A once feared warlord or empire might suddenly find themselves crumbling without understanding why, as the Hrud's influence slowly, inexorably erodes their strength. This kind of warfare would have profound cultural consequences on the galaxy. The very idea of war would change. No longer would it be a matter of clashes between grand armies or space battles of unimaginable scale. Instead, war would become a far more insidious and pervasive force. The Hrud would spread their influence through every crack and crevice, ensuring that their enemies' resources, morale, and even their belief in their own strength would decay. Empires would fall, not due to catastrophic battles, but because the Hrud slowly broke them down from the inside, turning even the most seemingly indomitable foes into hollow shells of their former selves. The impact on the galaxy's politics would be equally profound. The Hrud would likely view other races and empires as temporary structures, fleeting things that are doomed to fall apart. Their relationships with other factions would be marked by manipulation and subterfuge rather than open diplomacy or direct conflict. Any alliance formed by the Hrud would be based solely on what they could extract from it, whether that be resources, knowledge, or influence. Their primary goal would not be to make allies in the traditional sense, but to ensure that any power they interacted with would eventually succumb to decay, just like everything else in the galaxy. It's not hard to imagine that under Hrud rule, the galaxy would become a place where trust is a rare commodity. The slow, subtle manipulation of other races would breed an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. No one would be able to trust anyone, as the Hrud's influence would be felt in every corner of existence. Their enemies, their allies, and even their subjects would be subjected to their manipulative grasp, their trust eroded piece by piece. The galaxy, once a vibrant and diverse place, would slowly turn into a place where decay is the only certainty. Culturally, the Hrud would also likely have a different approach to art, literature, and expression. Where other races might create grand epics or indulge in artistic pursuits as a way to preserve their legacy, the Hrud would see such things as fleeting. Instead of building monuments to their greatness, they would perhaps embrace the concept of decay in all things, even in their art. Instead of creating works to be admired for centuries, they might create works designed to decay, to break down, to rot away over time. These would be artworks designed not to stand the test of time, but to remind the viewer of the inevitable fate that awaits all things, an eternal cycle of creation and destruction. Some fans have speculated that the Hrud might even view their ability to control entropy as a form of art in itself. In their eyes, the breaking down of matter and the slow erosion of time could be seen as the ultimate expression of their creative power. While other races build and preserve, the Hrud would tear down and decay, seeing this as an act of artistic and philosophical purity. The galaxy under Hrud rule would be a place where the very fabric of existence is slowly unraveled, where entropy becomes the ultimate form of artistic expression. Perhaps the most unsettling part of Hrud culture would be their utter lack of empathy. In a galaxy where other races often fight for some greater cause, be it for freedom, for glory, or for survival, the Hrud would fight for nothing more than the perpetuation of their own existence. They would have no ideals beyond their own survival, no compassion for those they destroy, no mercy for those they manipulate. Everything in the galaxy would be reduced to a tool in the Hrud's pursuit of power and preservation. Empires would be built and torn down at their whim, and entire civilizations would be erased, not out of hatred or anger, but simply because they were no longer useful in the Hrud's cold, calculating vision of the future. If the Hrud were in control, the galaxy would be a place of unrelenting decay and quiet destruction. They would not seek to dominate through force or intimidation, but through a slow, inevitable breakdown of everything they touched. Trust, loyalty, and love would be foreign concepts under their rule. Only the cold, unfeeling power of entropy would remain. The galaxy would be a place of ruins, not built by any warlord's conquest, but by the quiet and relentless erosion of everything that came before. The military power of the Hrud would be unlike anything we've seen in the galaxy before, blending subtlety, cunning, and insidious force into a form of warfare that is both terrifying and difficult to comprehend. They would not engage in open battles or grand-scale invasions like the Imperium, the Orcs, or the Eldar. Instead, their military strength would lie in the quiet, gradual erosion of their enemies' resources, willpower, and ability to resist. In many ways, the Hrud's power would not be felt immediately, but would unfold slowly, like a creeping disease, weakening their foes until there was nothing left but a husk of what once stood in defiance. The Hrud's military capabilities would hinge on their mastery over entropy and decay, forces that most other races would see as inevitable but unstoppable. Imagine a Hrud force not relying on heavy artillery or massive armies, but instead on the quiet decay of their enemies' resources. Their technology would allow them to break down enemy fortifications, ships, and even entire fleets without ever firing a shot. They would not need to directly engage in battle. Instead, they could destroy enemy forces from within, turning the most formidable weapons into nothing more than rust and ruin. Ships would decay while in transit, turning to nothing but broken shells as they drifted through space, and entire armies would find their weapons crumbling in their hands at the most crucial moment. This ability to degrade their enemies over time would make the Hrud uniquely dangerous in a galaxy full of warring factions. Unlike the Eldar, who rely on their advanced weaponry and psychic abilities, or the Imperium, which uses sheer numbers and relentless force, the Hrud would engage in warfare through attrition, patience, and manipulation. Their forces would infiltrate behind enemy lines, planting seeds of destruction in ways that no one would even notice until it was far too late. Entire fleets of starships could be rendered useless by the Hrud's power, their engines failing, their crew incapacitated by the breakdown of their life support systems. The Hrud's subtle approach to warfare would make them the perfect hidden enemy, unseen and unnoticed until the damage has already been done. One fan theory proposes that the Hrud might use specialized weaponry that accelerates entropy, turning entire battlefields into desolate, uninhabitable wastelands in mere hours. These weapons would not be the flashy, powerful energy blasts we see in traditional warfare, but more subtle, insidious tools that slowly wear down enemy forces. A single shot from a Hrud weapon could cause the molecular structure of a tank or a building to begin disintegrating from the inside out, turning it into a pile of dust and rubble before the enemy even realized what was happening. This method of warfare, which relies on the breakdown of matter, would be a nightmare for any army that relies on technology to maintain its power. But the Hrud's military strength would not be limited to weapons alone. Their culture of decay would imbue them with an entirely different approach to strategy and tactics. While most armies rely on rigid formations and carefully laid out plans, the Hrud would thrive in chaos. Their tactics would be built around the inevitability of entropy, using deception, misdirection, and sabotage to throw their enemies off balance. Instead of launching a direct assault, they would break down their enemy's ability to coordinate, turning their own strength into weakness. The more an enemy tried to rally its forces, the more the Hrud would tear at the foundation, spreading confusion and mistrust among the ranks. Every soldier would be fighting not just their enemy, but the slow, inevitable decay of their own equipment, morale, and resolve. In space warfare, the Hrud would likely rely on hit-and-run tactics, attacking with precision and disappearing before their enemy even has a chance to retaliate. Their ships would not be large and imposing like those of the Imperium or the Necrons. Instead, they would be small, nimble vessels capable of infiltrating enemy space, planting decay-inducing devices on enemy ships, and escaping before the damage became apparent. These ships could use the power of entropy to break down enemy defenses, disable shields, and weaken weapon systems, all without ever being seen by the enemy. The Hrud would strike like ghosts, unseen and unheard, until their enemies were already crippled by their actions. One could easily imagine entire planets falling under Hrud control, not through a violent invasion, but through the quiet collapse of their infrastructure. Where other races would launch invasions to take control of a world, the Hrud would allow the world to decay from within. They would sabotage power plants, cause food supplies to rot, and disrupt communications, all the while ensuring that no one would even realize they were behind it. Over time, the planet would descend into chaos, its leaders powerless to stop the breakdown of their society. When the planet finally fell, it would do so not in a dramatic battle, but in a slow, inevitable collapse, leaving the Hrud to move in and claim what was left. The Hrud's ability to infiltrate and manipulate their enemies on such a subtle level would make them the ultimate masters of psychological warfare. While the Imperium, the Eldar, and other galactic powers relied on the strength of their armies, the Hrud would wage a war of attrition on the minds of their enemies. They would spread paranoia, doubt, and fear among the ranks of their foes, making them question everything. Every piece of technology, every weapon, and every fortification would become a potential source of failure, as the Hrud's influence slowly seeped into every corner of their enemies' operations. Soldiers would begin to doubt their equipment, officers would begin to doubt their strategies, and leaders would find themselves unable to rally their forces against an unseen enemy that worked from the shadows. In addition to their ability to manipulate technology and weaken their enemies through decay, the Hrud would likely employ a form of psychological warfare that exploits the inevitability of their power. The concept of decay and entropy is something that affects all things in the galaxy, from the stars to the smallest atom. The Hrud would be masters at exploiting this universal truth, ensuring that no matter how strong their enemies were, they would always be fighting against the inevitable. The thought that everything, every weapon, every piece of armor, every fortress would eventually decay would be a constant weight on the minds of their foes. In this way, the Hrud would wage war not just against the physical forces of their enemies, but against their very will to fight. In the end, the Hrud's military power would not be about overwhelming force or grandiose invasions. It would be about slow, deliberate destruction. It would be a form of warfare that was as subtle as it was deadly, with each victory coming not from force, but from the quiet erosion of their enemy's strength. The galaxy would become a place where nothing, no matter how powerful, could stand against the slow, inevitable decay that the Hrud would bring. And in this quiet, creeping war, the Hrud would reign supreme, their power felt everywhere, but seen nowhere. The true strength of the Hrud would be their ability to make their enemies crumble, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 small, unseen cuts. As we bring this deep dive into the mysterious and powerful Hrud to a close, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe and wonder about what could have been if this enigmatic race had ever been given the spotlight in the Warhammer 40K universe. The Hrud, with their unique abilities and secretive nature, have always lingered in the shadows, their true potential hidden from the majority of the galaxy. But through speculation, we've begun to peel back the layers, revealing a force that could have altered the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The question of what might have happened if the Hrud had risen to power is one that ignites the imagination. They are not a race of brute force or mindless destruction, but rather one that understands the subtle art of decay, of time itself. Their power lies in their ability to break down and erode, not through flashy displays of strength, but through the quiet, inevitable forces of entropy. If the Hrud were the dominant force in the galaxy, it wouldn't be an empire built on military might, but rather on a creeping, unstoppable influence that undermines everything it touches. We've explored how the Hrud might have shaped the galaxy, how they could have worked behind the scenes, manipulating events from the shadows and using their mastery of entropy to break down the mightiest of empires. From their potential to have once been the guardians of time itself, to the theory that they could have played a part in the rise of the Tyranids, we've seen how their subtle, insidious nature could have changed the course of galactic history. And in a way, perhaps that's what makes the Hrud so terrifying. They don't need to conquer with weapons or armies. They conquer by eroding the very foundation of reality itself. The idea that the Hrud might have influenced the fall of the Eldar, or even shaped the rise of the Necrons and the forces of chaos, gives us a sense of just how deeply ingrained they might be in the galaxy's history. They are not just another race, but a hidden force whose influence could have stretched across eons, shaping the galaxy in ways that no one ever saw coming. If they were indeed responsible for the downfall of the Eldar, or even for the creation of the Chaos Gods, then the Hrud would be the ultimate puppet masters of the galaxy, guiding the course of history without ever revealing their hand. We've also speculated on how the Hrud's culture and military strategies would have impacted the galaxy if they were in control. Imagine a galaxy where everything, from technology to entire civilizations, is slowly decaying, eaten away by the relentless march of time, where every victory is hollow because the Hrud's influence is at work, gradually weakening their enemies until they are nothing but shadows of their former selves. The Hrud would not be a race of loud, proud conquerors, but of quiet manipulators who understand that time is the ultimate weapon. They wouldn't need armies or weapons of mass destruction. They would need only patience and an intimate understanding of how everything in the galaxy will eventually break down. The idea of the Hrud controlling the galaxy, not through military power but through their quiet, unstoppable influence, is a chilling thought. They would be a force of nature, shaping the universe not by direct action, but through a slow, inexorable process of decay. They wouldn't rule with an iron fist, but with a whisper, a subtle touch that would make the strongest civilizations crumble over time. In this scenario, the galaxy would become a place where nothing could last forever, and where the very concept of permanence would be nothing more than an illusion. But of course, these are just theories, speculations and musings from the minds of fans who have always been fascinated by the Hrud's potential. It's important to remember that while the Hrud have a unique place in Warhammer 40K lore, much of what we've discussed here is based on what we can imagine they could be, not necessarily what they are. There is so much about them that remains unknown, and that's part of what makes them such an intriguing mystery. Could they have played a part in the grand tapestry of galactic history? Could they have been the true power behind the scenes all along? It's impossible to say for certain, but one thing is clear. The Hrud's role in the universe, if they were ever fully realized, would have been far more complex and far-reaching than we could have ever imagined. And now, I'd love to hear what you think. What are your thoughts on the Hrud's potential in the Warhammer 40K universe? Could they have shaped the galaxy in the ways we've discussed? Or do you have other ideas about what role they might have played in the galaxy's history? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more deep dives into the mysteries of the 40K universe. Let's keep the conversation going and explore all the incredible possibilities that Warhammer 40K has to offer.